Kimberly Lowe with us. She's running for House of Delegates member in the Suffolk area. And she is with us now. She's pretty fired up today. She wanted to get on. She loves the 6:30 hour. Kimberly Lowe, great to have you with us.
Hey, good morning, John. So yesterday the governor announced that he plans on moving Confederate statues. And I'm a farmer. I was out in the tractor. I was listening with my earbuds in, and it's one of the most hypocritical things I've heard in my entire life. We have a governor who dressed up in blackface next to a Ku Klux Klan member who is acting like he's a man with empathy. Now, where was the outrage in Virginia when we have a governor who is clearly a racist and was raised in the South like that? I mean, it's a complete hypocrisy. It's appalling.
I guess he feels that he has to do something. And I guess my question with the statues is I really don't care about the statues, Kimberly, to be honest, but I want to get all sides on here. Why does taking a 130-year-old statue down of a Confederate general that was a general for CSA, Confederate States of America, why does that matter? Like, why does that bother you?
Removing history is going to make people forget history. It's not going to remove the pain that African Americans are experiencing. They are experiencing real racism and real pain on a daily basis. But the last thing you want to do is you want to remove history, because we need to remember what happened. There were 650,000 to 1 million people who died. This is going to cause a lot of problems for other relatives in the South. I am from Virginia. I grew up in Virginia. My family came over in the 1700s. They settled the area. The Malones came in as indentured servants. I had other family members that came in, but they were farmers. We were not slave owners. I have a relative, Richard Lowe. He died at the Battle of Seven Pines. He was just a dirt farmer from Virginia. He died in injuries from the war. He was taken to a warehouse in Richmond, and he was thrown in an unmarked grave. He left a wife behind who was pregnant with his child, who would later become my great-great-great-grandfather. There's a lot of history here, and it's not fair to bury history. There were 40,000 blacks who died in the Civil War. There are around 179,000 that served. So I am concerned about the statues being destroyed and harmed, but I really don't think that burying history is the best way to go about this. I think we need to address it in other ways. I think we need to open up the discussion on race, because racism is alive and well in Virginia. And I grew up in it. I grew up in a very segregated town. Blacks lived on one side of the tracks, whites lived on the other. I went to school with only 2 African Americans. They were Rondé and Tiki Barber, who later became football stars. So they were pretty much the upper echelon that I ended up going to school with, if they were African American. And I think that we need to open up the discussion on the solutions to racism, and I don't think that removing the statues is the issue. What do you think, John?
So you think it's a symbolic issue and it really doesn't do anything?
It's not going to do anything. And I noticed that there were protests in Crewe, where a lot of people were lined up in Crewe, Virginia, real small town, kind of outside of Farmville. And everyone had up signs saying, "We don't want hate statues here." Well, I think that we all need a history lesson. They aren't hate statues. This is something that people are portraying on these statues. And I think that we need to remember that this was a war about economics, and I think that we need to remember the horrors of war, because we don't need another civil war in America. We need to remember what happened. And I think this is going to cause more division than it's going to solve problems. It's going to cause more racial division.
The argument that it's erasing history, Kimberly.
Yeah.
Let me just quarrel with that. I grew up in New Jersey. I went to high school, college, and graduate school in New Jersey. I'd never been south. Until I was a young man, I really had never been south of Philadelphia, right? So I didn't know anything about the South. But, I mean, I studied history. I understood the Civil War. I studied it in various classes. I read several books on it. I mean, I never saw a Confederate statue. I never saw a statue of Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Beauregard, anybody. I mean, I knew who they were, just like I knew who the Northern generals were, and I was also quite understood the Battle of Atlanta. I understood the horror that went there, Sherman burning things down. I also read about the North that burnt Shenandoah Valley, salted the field so they couldn't grow crops there for 2 decades. People starving there. It was there was atrocities all over the place. That's what happens in war. But whether or not I saw a statue on Monument Avenue in Richmond, which I had never been to, had no impact on my understanding history. So how does getting rid of a statue erase history? Now, if they were burning Civil War books, if there was a dumpster and they were all getting burned and we stopped teaching it in the schools, I would be adamantly opposed to that, because you can't do that. It is what it is. You can't change it. But I just don't know why a statue on Monument Avenue that's 130 years old, removing it or not. Look, they took the Confederate statues out of New Orleans, and I remember that everybody was upset over that and blah, 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 right? It went on for like 2 weeks. When it was over, I never heard a peep. I've been to New Orleans. Statues are there. They're not there. I go out and eat. I don't know where this matters in life. 30% of Richmond high school kids didn't graduate in 2019. 30%. How does a statue up or down help that number? That's my question, and I'm not being confrontational. I want to understand.
Okay. I can tell you, having grown up here for so many generations, that there are still wounds from the Civil War that have been carried down generation from generation in how we were taught when we were raised. And there's still animosity between the North and the South, believe it or not, having been raised a Southerner. Like, you would not expect that, but my grandmother, she's 95 years old. She grew up in a different time. She helped raise me. And there's still wounds from this, and there's still animosities that are held in the South. And I think it's just going to cause more division to take away the history from people who have lost family members. But more importantly, it's not going to solve problems. And I was a teacher in an inner city, predominantly African-American school. We have a government who has kept African-American populations in generational poverty, and we have to end that poverty and end the government dependency. And a lot of this needs to happen at the education level. As a teacher in an inner city, predominantly black school, I was forced to change my grades to make it appear as if the students were performing better.
Wait. Stop. Stop.
Going off.
Say that again. Say that again.
Okay. I, as a teacher in a predominantly African-American school, was forced to change my grades to make it appear as if the students were performing better.
Who made you do that?
The school system and the school principals, or I would lose my job.
Administration.
And they were also changing the SOL scores. This is Roanoke City Schools in Roanoke. They were manipulating SOL scores in order to get funding for the school. I didn't stand for it. I left. I said, I cannot help these children if I am failing them. I received a poor evaluation because I was told that my expectations were too high for my students and that I needed to show them more videos. And I taught all grades 6 through 12.
When was this? What year?
In Roanoke City. Oh, gosh, 2004.
And what were you teaching? What grade level?
I taught grades 6 through 8 at that school.
So you were at the middle school?
I was at the middle school, but I also taught at the high school level. And there's absolutely no discipline. The children are allowed to be off the hook. They're allowed to threaten your life. They're allowed to threaten you with scissors. They're allowed to beat you with their purses. They're allowed to make sexual advances. And if you ever took something to administration, they would rip up the paperwork that you would have written up for the kids and thrown it away. So they were allowed to be completely off the hook, which does not set up a learning environment. we are failing our children. They are being kept in poverty, and I think they're being kept in poverty so that way there is a lower working class. When I taught at the high school, which was also a predominantly African-American school, I had kids tell me, Miss Lowe, all I have to do is get pregnant, and I don't need to learn any of this because my grandma lives in the housing project, my mama lives in the housing project, and I can do that too. And I told them, I said, you need to get through this because you don't want to work at McDonald's for the rest of your life. And I've had countless students come back to me and go, you know, Miss Lowe, you were right. I should have listened to you because this is not the life that I wanted. So we have to start at the education level. We have kids learning really ridiculous things that are not going to help them at all, John. I mean, I don't know who needs to learn about quatrains in fourth grade. I think we need job skills and we need to learn respect. And there has to be jobs when they get out of school. And we have to end the generation poverty. It's generation after generation after generation. And it's generations of people who are in pain. And how can you be happy if you are in economic disparity?
Kara, turn on your mic. You got to get involved in this. This is shocking to me that the administration would have told you to, first of all, we've all heard about some of the calamity that's gone on as far as threatening teachers, but being forced to change grades. People have gone to prison for that in Atlanta, okay?
Wow.
Administrators, not teachers, who were told to do that. Kara, I want you to react. We're with Kimberly Lowe. Kimberly is running for House of Delegates member in Suffolk. She's vying for the Republican nomination there. That's held by a Democrat right now. She was a teacher in Roanoke. She's telling us that in middle school she was pressured to change scores and grades in order to pass people that shouldn't have gotten passed. You got 30% dropout rate in Richmond. She taught in an African-American school. How does that benefit the black community? Answer me that, Kara.
Well, first of all, Kimberly, thank you for sharing. I know that wasn't easy to share. And one thing that you said, one thing that you said that they were basically making sure that the working class continued by failing these children. And I think that's important to know when it is when the conversation of how things are systematic, that's what we're talking about. That's the systematic, I don't even want to say oppression, but the systematic, it's the word that is escaping me, but we're running out of time. But that is what we're talking about when things are set up for, and not to say that is like that we can't escape it, and we as in black people, we can't escape it. There's no other way around it. But when the opportunity to fail is more prevalent than the opportunity to rise out of it, that's telling. That's very telling.
The schools are being set up for a school-to-prison pipeline
Absolutely.
for labor.
Absolutely.
And, Chesterfield, they have one of the biggest school-to-prison pipeline examples. There are so many kids that are being put behind bars, and there are so many counties and towns that are using this labor in order to save themselves money. It's labor off of the African American community. It's absolutely horrible.
And I also I'm sorry, Kim. I also want to add that it's socioeconomics as well, because it's not just black people who are falling below these poverty lines and in these this systematic thing. It's really the have or the have-nots. Now, most of the time, black people are in the have-nots. I want to rally people, because we're running out of time for this segment. People who care, not even just black people too, but people who care. We need everybody in on this to make resources available to children, black children, white children, Latino children who are in these poverty stricken environments, who don't have the resources. Make these resources available. Do what you can. Push back. Support economically. Do something. We need everybody on this. If we only have black people doing this for black children,
well, the first thing we need to do is vote out Democratic mayors and Democratic governors that have been setting the system up for 50 years. I mean, it is inconceivable to me that LeVar Stoney in Richmond, and Kara, I'm sorry, I cannot get off this. I can't get off it. It's inconceivable to me that a black person in Richmond with a child would vote for a mayor whose school dropout rate is 30% and up 15% in there. I mean, why would you vote for this guy? What chance do you have? Backed by the unions and everything else. You know, Kimberly, the fact that they pressured you into changing grades how is that helpful? Right? So the school gets more money. I guess that's part of it. But get back to the school to prison pipeline for labor. What do you mean by that, Kimberly?
Children are failing. The behavior is off the hook because there's no discipline from early on in the schools. And coming from a background of poverty in their home, they end up committing crimes very early on. There needs to be more support for these children in school, and pouring money into these schools doesn't help. These children had so much money being poured into the schools, but they were not taking advantage of it. And a lot of it has to do with behavior issues. There needs to be some type of discipline in schools because you cannot learn in a hostile environment. And teachers are not going to stay for pay. Teachers are going to stay if they can come into a workplace that isn't hostile, where they can actually teach kids. And a priority should be teaching kids to read, because I can tell you that the majority of those kids by middle school and high school and graduating still could not read. Now, somewhere it's because they would pass them. We need to teach them, and we're not. And it can be so hostile that you can't. You would have kids that would beat their desk just crazy off the hook, and there were no consequences for anything. And you can't learn in that environment. So it has to start early on, and they're not doing it, and we have to change the curriculum because they're not learning anything that's going to help them with life, so that way they can be successful when they get out. And I truly think the system just wants to keep them there in that poverty generation after generation. We have people completely dependent upon the government.
It's an unbelievable story. I'll just say this, Kimberly Lowe. We need you in the General Assembly to tell the other clowns there what is actually going on in the world. Half of these people that got elected on the Democratic side have never owned a business, or some of them have never had a job where they have to fight for stuff every day, like you have and like Kara has and I have. We got to change this, no question about it. We've got to get you there somehow, some way. But how you would vote for LeVar Stoney if you live in Richmond and you have a child or a grandchild in that school system. It's beyond me. Why would you do that? Let's see, 30%. I have a 30% chance of my child not getting out of high school, and it's gone up 15% since the clown has been there. Where are we going with this? I have no idea, but it's not good. Kara, Kimberly, we're out of time. Thank you.